Hey everyone, this is Brian Funk, and I want to tell you about my Music Production Club, which is a subscription service that gets you a steady flow of new music production tools right into your email inbox. Currently, you're hearing the latest addition to the club, the Mode Audio Music Production Club Sample Pack. Mode Audio has kindly supplied us with 350 megabytes of samples from some of their greatest sample packs. I just grabbed a few of these samples and strung them together for this intro. It's a really awesome selection of sounds, and that's included with your membership, along with all kinds of other Ableton Live packs. I have tutorials, I have templates, the What Bob Ross Teaches Us About Music Production book, and plenty more. It also gets you in our Discord community, so you can reach out and talk with like-minded producers. You get the Music Production Club samples folder, and there's even discounts to all sorts of really cool companies around the internet that'll help add lots of color and sounds to your music production projects. That's the Music Production Club. Check it out at brianfunk.com/MPC. And be sure to head over to modeaudio.com. Right now they're running their 30% off summer sale, where you can get sounds like the ones you hear in this background music. They're a really awesome site, and I'm really proud to have them help sponsor the Music Production Club with these great samples. So go to modeaudio.com, enjoy their 30% off summer sale, and join the Music Production Club. Now on to the show. How's it going, everybody? And welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. On today's episode, I have Matt Ramsey. He's a vocal teacher, singer, coach, and he's going to talk to us about some of the stuff he's been up to, give us some advice for singers, which I think would be helpful if you yourself are a singer, but also if you're working with a singer. I think working with singers is one of the more challenging things. There's so much more, I think, like self-consciousness that compared to like when you have an instrument. So I think it'll be really great to pick Matt's brain and learn about this stuff. I want to shout out his site. He's got a fun tool called the Rangefinder. We'll talk about that because you can, well, Matt, you know what? Let me welcome you, and I'll let you tell us about that. You'll say it better than I will.
I'll tell you all about it. Brian, thanks so much for having me on. Hey, everybody. It's good to be here. One of the issues that I see as a vocal coach is, I've got a good sized, YouTube channel and all that stuff. And I'm reading all of these comments, and I see people say their vocal range, and they're like, oh man, I have a vocal range from like E2 all the way up to like E7. And it's just like, I'm reading these comments, and I'm like, there's no way. There's no possible way. And what I think this all reflects back to me as a voice teacher is, gosh, it's really hard to kind of measure things as a singer. That was something that I saw with more beginning singers. And, here in Austin, we have a lot of tech folks. And so they were very kind of goal-oriented, and they were like, well, how do I actually know if I'm getting better as a singer, besides just getting complimented on my voice? And I was like, yeah, you're right. There's not a whole lot of measurable ways that you can see yourself improving as a singer once you start vocal training. And so I had this idea. I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could kind of measure your vocal range and see how that changes over time? And so what I did was I hired somebody to develop like a really simple app where you just sing your lowest note all the way up to your highest note. Like it does not have to sound good. But as soon as you do that, you just type in your email address, and then it'll show you the results, and it'll be like you have a range of X number of octaves from this note to this note. And what you can do is you can write that down, or you can share it on social media if you're feeling brave, and then you can kind of measure it over time and see how it adjusts and how it changes as you develop your voice.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because so much, if you're talking about like exercise and fitness, so much of your motivation comes from like actually seeing results and seeing like, hey, I've come this far. And I think it's just another nice thing to have. So, like you're actually doing some good work and that you're making progress.
Yeah, especially with music stuff. Like, I guess I could probably turn this around to you too, Brian, is like, how can you measure that you've become a better producer? over time? Well, obviously, like your mixes probably sound better, like your productions sound better, like they're all more cohesive, the instruments fit together better. But how do you actually like quantify that and see a progression over time, except that, you know, you're not critically embarrassed of your mixes or your productions anymore. And I think the same thing is true with singing. It's like, you know, how do you actually know if you're getting better, especially in this age of YouTube videos where it's just, you know, you go down the rabbit hole, you watch 20 different videos from 20 different teachers and you're exhausted. And by the end, you're so confused with information. And the truth is, you have no idea whether you're actually being a better singer or whether you're just getting more lost.
Yeah, I mean, as a music producer, I mean, sometimes you put something together and you're like, oh, this is amazing. And then a couple of weeks later, you might just not feel it anymore. And you might listen back to an older production and be like, oh man, that was really good. Like, what happened? So there's this like kind of like up and down. I think that's especially true for the voice because it is part of your physical body. So it really has a lot to do with how you're feeling in particular. And, you know, one night, you know, you might get together and be singing and feel amazing. And then like another day, you're just like, oh, something's just not right. It's not happening today.
Right.
So to have something that at least you can like keep track of a little bit, you know, I think
and that's
great.
Honestly, that's probably the goal of most vocal training is to try to make those moments the exception rather than the rule. Like those moments where you're like, you know that you're not doing as well as you typically could. There are other coaches and other, you know, people out there that are like, oh, you never have a bad day singing if you follow my program or whatever. It's not true. Everybody, the voice is flesh and blood. It's in your body. It's the only instrument. Well, not the only instrument. I guess you could count patting on your thighs or, you know, thunking your larynx. So as different instruments, it's endlessly varied, but, you're absolutely right. It changes a little bit every day. And I think the goal of most good vocal training is to try to make things more predictable and more reliable as you're moving on. So yes, you may be going like this, but you'll notice that my finger is generally rising, even though you're having up days and down days. Like generally, it's getting better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And that site, just so people have it, is rangefinder.ramseyvoice.com. So yeah, check it out. It's fun. It's fun even just by yourself to just see like what you can do, kind of like screeches you can get up and how low you can get. I've seen some funny Facebook conversations because you can share your results on social media too. And I've seen some funny conversations of people who are like, oh, I can sing from this to this. And they're like, well, I can sing from this to this. And here's the truth of the matter, folks, is like, I'm going to be really honest right now. Your vocal range doesn't matter. Now, let me clarify that for a second. Your vocal range doesn't matter as much as how the notes sound. So I'll see people who are like, they have a phenomenal range, but like every note's like, ah, like that. And they're able to go, ah, like super, super high. But what's wrong with that sound, if you want to say that there's anything wrong with it, is that there's a lack of power. There's a lack of strength. And in voice teaching terms, we would say like a lack of chest voice. The vocal cords aren't closing enough to create a complex enough sound that we register as like really beautiful, full singing voice. Now, there's exceptions to that. In the breathy voice, there's tons of singers that sound beautiful on, a $3,000 condenser mic. Iron and Wine, Elliott Smith, Connor Oberst, like they sound amazing when they sing breathy. But the thing about those singers is that they can also sing more powerfully as well. And so you want to make sure that even though, you have this really wide vocal range, you want to make sure that the notes all sound good as well. So range is just a number. What's really important is the quality. But you can start off by measuring your vocal range and then identifying, what parts of your voice aren't working and starting to work on those. Yeah, I'm sure you probably get asked this once in a while, like if people are able to learn to sing or are they kind of natural. I think more than like any other instrument, people assume like you're either a singer or you're not.
Right.
And probably for that reason, a lot of like our self-worth gets wrapped up in our singing, which is why it can be so nerve-wracking for people to sing in front of others, because it's like this sort of like, you're this or you're not.
Yes.
So like, do you think like anyone can learn to sing, or do you think there's like definitely some sort of natural talent that plays into this? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so thanks for teeing that up. That was a really good question. And I like the way that you phrased it too, which is that it's yes, but anyone can learn to sing. Absolutely. If you're listening to this right now, you can learn to sing. You can learn to sing on pitch. You can learn to sing with better intonation. You can learn to sing on rhythm, chest voice, head voice, mixed voice, all this stuff. This is all learnable. However, there are some people that show more of an aptitude for this than others. And even for people that are exceptionally, let's say, like naturally talented, like they have an aptitude right out the gate, like even with those folks, it can still take, 6 months, a year, a couple of years of vocal training before you really start to see that kind of paying dividends. And then there are some people that they can work for a couple of years and they still don't feel like they're where they want to be. For me as a teacher, I'm like, but remember where you were? Oh my gosh, what a difference. Like listen to your voice here and now versus then. And it's such a huge difference. Are they going to go on tour anytime soon? Probably not. But I think what you have to ask yourself as a potential vocalist, as a beginning singer, wherever you're at in your journey, is it worth it to you to make the most of this instrument that you have, even if you may not have the most aptitude for it? And it doesn't matter whether you do have that aptitude or not. What really makes the difference is you deciding that you're going to become good at this. At 22 years old, I decided that I wanted to play all the instruments on the album that I recorded. And that meant learning to play drums. I've been playing guitar since I was 14, 12, or 13 years old. But learning drums at 21 years old is not an easy feat. I mean, I had a great teacher, but like even just learning how to split up your hands for a paradiddle was like just like this monumentous task at the time. Now, I'm never going to be a Travis Barker or Neil Peart or, any of these Chad Smith, any of these fantastic drummers that you listen to. But now I have the skill set that if I want to play like a simple beat, simple fills, I'm probably not even giving myself enough credit. I mean, I am not a good drummer by any means, but I can definitely do more than just keep a basic beat now because I've been practicing that instrument for years and years and years now. And I think that, to kind of go back to what you said, Brian, is like, I think that a lot of people imagine drums as one of those things as like you're born with or you're not. Like you have good rhythm or you don't. Right. And so really, if you can do it, then anyone can,
Well, I tend to agree with you because I was 14 when I started guitar and had literally no understanding of music at all. Didn't understand beats, notes, anything, so I had to learn it all. And it was a matter of the time invested in just the study and the practice. And I have found that with other instruments, other things in life too. Drums, for instance, for me, I never took lessons, but I was lucky enough to be the house where we would practice in our basement. So the drum set usually got left there.
Yes.
So I'd sneak down there and, and I remember like vividly like certain breakthroughs where I was able to like play the kick drum at a different rhythm than the hi-hat. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
And it's almost like the same feeling when you finally balance a bicycle and you're riding and you're like, oh, and as soon as you think about it, you fall off. But there's this just like switch or something that happens.
Right. What records would you drum to?
Oh man, probably like real simple stuff. Well, I guess it's not really that simple, but there was like some Nirvana, some.
Yep.
I mean, that's not simple, but keeping it straight. Weezer
Absolutely.
was the band I was really into at the time.
They're great
when we were playing back then. So those beats are pretty straightforward and simple. Beatles. I always like the drummers that like play for the song.
Right.
You know? So, there's some amazing, fantastic drummers, but, I'm thinking it from the perspective of a song, so I don't really want all that extra flair and,
yeah. Well, it's funny. So you brought up like two very different drummers, and this is not a drumming podcast, so we don't have to go down this too long. But I mean, Dave Grohl, if you look at his beats, I mean, all of his beats were copped, and he's talked about this. All of his beats were copped from like 70s disco bands, and you can hear that. Like he's got like a lot of that. He's got a lot of that in his music, but that syncopation is difficult to learn as a beginner. And so it's not all like dum dum ch, dum dum ch, dum dum ch, like in Smells Like Teen Spirit. Like there's a lot that happens before that too. And other songs of theirs are like really funky if you listen to it. Like Serve the Servants is a really, really funky song. And then you also mentioned Ringo, in that I think of Ringo not as someone that is playing basic beats. He's like, exactly like you said, he's playing to the song. It's like, he's thinking, I'm thinking of like In My Life, there are places I remember, where it's like every beat is on a different drum. And like anybody else would have been, there are if they were really staying with a basic beat. But instead, he disconnected everything. They call that linear drumming, I think. And it's just such a fun thing to learn, how to split up your limbs like that. And to bring it back to singing, I see that same thing with my singers, in that if they come in singing like, then them having that breakthrough of, no, just talk it. Just use your real speaking voice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Them using that fuller is such a powerful moment for them. They're like, wow, singing is so much easier when I don't think of it as singing, when I think of it as speaking, when I just go back to the power of my speaking voice, the power and the resonance, things get so easy. And then looking at head voice of being like, yeah, just go, woo, or like, hey, whatever it happens to be, like getting them to kind of get in touch with and discover these different parts of their voice, and being able to connect those parts together is really fun. So just that kind of experimentation is just, that's the whole point at first, when you're first beginning, before you're even really thinking about, oh, I'm going to sing this song. People come with this perspective of like, oh, if I don't sing the song right the first time, then I'm not meant to sing that song. And nothing could be further from the truth. Like even those singers that made those songs that we absolutely love, there was a progression. There was like many, many, many rough drafts that came before that finished thing that we hear on the record.
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I'm sure like you probably go over a lot of this, things like, where do you breathe? How the rhythm of the words and all of that. I mean, I find like when I'm doing my music, a lot of my vocal parts come out of just sort of like blabbering and nonsense to find, all right, this is a good like rhythmic thing with my syllables and my consonants and my vowels. And sometimes you say something that's like a cool line.
Yeah.
And then you're like, all right, we'll work off that. But so much of it is like about just like feeling it. Just being free, like
right.
I don't consider myself, I'm not a trained singer at all. Like I'm in a rock band basically barking into a microphone, But I mean, when I'm free, to just, I don't feel like I'm singing, kind of like you said, actually, like where I'm just exploring a little bit.
Yeah.
I find like that's when the stuff happens. And then you kind of like apply the technique, I guess, and the thought behind it and how you're going to like approach each line.
Yeah. I think when you're talking about the creative process, like no matter what it is, whether it's writing a song or, learning how to sing or, putting together a drum breakdown or something like that, you want to start from that place of just kind of like tapping into the unconscious and getting out of the way. And you're right, like just blabbing is a great way to do that at first. You know, we do like a lot of like a lot of really silly sounds with singing. There's a lot of good reasons for that. But also, like, if you start thinking of like, oh, I'm going to sing Somebody to Love by Queen, you're already like attaching so much meaning to all of this, to what you're training, that oftentimes you kind of get in your own way. And that's why vocal exercises are such an important part of becoming a better singer, is like learning how, well, you know, you did it on this. What's the difference between that and singing it on, you know, a lyric? Well, It turns out there is a big difference there. However, it is helpful in deconstructing that slightly of like, hey, you did it with this. Now let's do it with this.
Yeah, right. So like it's that like getting your head out of the way thing that is so much the problem in so many things.
Yes.
We're overthinking. We're not actually doing it. We're thinking about doing it. Right.
And then when you start doing it, then you start thinking about yourself doing it, and you have this like, it's like you're not even in your own body. And so you were talking earlier about kind of like, you know, coaching singers in a production capacity. And if you're trying to train a singer while they're recording a vocal, it's too late. That's not the time to be throwing wrenches into the works. That's a really good way to kind of like really just, you know, burn a stack of cash. And so what you want is you want to get to that place as a vocalist where you know that you can do something, that you know that you can do it. And then even with all the fancy microphones in front of you, the producer looking at you, you can still relax enough in the knowledge that this is something that you can do, that you can start to experiment with it. I've never considered myself, and this is just being really honest, I don't think I have $1 million voice by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that I can make my voice do whatever I want it to do. If someone asked me to sing Robert Plant, I can do that. You know, if someone asked me to sing, you know, Bruno Mars, it'll take some warming up, but I can probably do that. Am I going to sound just like those singers? No, not necessarily. But can I do many of the same things that those singers can do? Yes. And I think that knowledge is really, that's kind of the first step of a singer coming into the studio, of having that solid confidence in their technique. And it doesn't have to be trained either necessarily. It may be something that you came to completely intuitively, and you've just been singing for a long time and you feel confident enough in your voice that you're like, boom, I can do this. But getting into the studio and all of a sudden your confidence goes out the window, that's not the time to do your vocal training. That's, you want to have that, you want to do that before and during.
Right. Yeah, well, now you're giving them just too much more to think about. And
exactly.
Yeah. So
there are very few fluid things that get better the more that you think about them yourself. Having somebody else coach you, that may be different. But you thinking about it yourself, that's a really, really good way to just distract yourself from what your real job is, which is to kind of put the emotion and the interpretation into the song that you intend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of surprised, and I'm in the middle of a project right now, recording project with three of us, 3-piece rock band, and, you know, we're playing like my guitar parts. You know, I do like one or two. I'm like, all right, cool. It's coming along. Now let's like really, you know, figure this out. So I'm like, you know, I always like to do one or two just to feel the groove and timing. And then like, I start out here and then I drop into like this little valley because now I'm thinking about it real hard. And then it's like, it takes me a couple takes to get back up to where I felt I was before, even though I'm probably much further along. And I've been surprised so many times, like upon listening the next day, to be like, wow, you know, like that wasn't bad. I mean, it was a pretty good shot there. But I was so in my head about it that I was missing like maybe some of the things that made it an interesting performance.
Yes.
And that's something I kind of wanted to ask you about because so many of my favorite singers, and I'm not, again, coming from like the trained singer perspective here, but so many of my favorite singers, I think, are not the people that are going to win like American Idol, you know?
Right.
It's the character. That's
Yes.
like what I guess, you know, and it's the same way I am with guitar and a lot of music, really. Like my favorite guitarists aren't the ones that play the fastest or,
Right.
you know, have the most notes in their solo or anything like that. So I guess I wanted to ask you, like, how do you see that like balance? Is there like a risk of like overtraining away the character and like removing these like really sweet imperfections by focusing too much on technique? Or is there, I just want to pick your brain on that idea a little
Man, that's
bit.
such a good question, Brian. So I would say that that's not really something to worry about unless you're dealing with a singer that's already really, really advanced. Most of the people that I see, some people are maybe surprised that I teach so many beginners. I don't know whether it's just kind of like, you know, my approach, but, you know, people of all levels feel very comfortable taking lessons with me, you know, enrolling in my courses and stuff like that. And working with folks like that, generally speaking, the more training that they get, the better off they are eventually. The more flexibility, the more agility, the more kind of, and I don't even mean flexibility vocally, but also like flexibility in terms of being able to adapt to different situations vocally. The more adept they are at being able to adjust to those situations. What you're talking about, Brian, definitely happens. And I'll give you a great example. I was working with fantastic singer. She's got a really, really good song out. I didn't ask her whether I could use her name, so I won't. But she's kind of in the country singer-songwriter space. But she is just a phenomenally trained vocalist, been singing a really long time. And we were working on her single for her album. And what was really interesting is we ran this song, 100 times in the studio, working on every little bit. And that's just kind of the singer that she is. I don't do that with all my singers. So don't feel overwhelmed if you hear that, thinking like, oh my God, I have to work on this song 100 times. That's just kind of what she was looking for. And that's what we worked on together to make her feel good. Once we got into the studio, again, this is a phenomenally advanced singer. One run that she'd practiced literally hundreds of times was not coming together. Was just like, she would skip over it every time. Like, I don't know whether she was aware of it or not, but I think she was just trying to play it safe because she knew that the microphone was on. And so she would skip it. And so, you know, we got 3 or 4 good full-on takes, like start to finish. And then we started to comp vocals. And I told the producer, I was like, you know, there's this section right here. She's not singing something that she wants to. And I want to go back and I want to see if she can actually do it. And so what we did was we went back in and she sang it a couple more times. And again, she was playing it safe. And I was like, no, let's just try it on a vocal exercise real quick. Can you, oh, like really simple. We just broke down the riff. Oh, or whatever it happened to be. And then we went and had her sing it. And just that moment of peace, that moment of reflection, of being able to just train that little spot, all of a sudden she nailed it, and that's the take that we used. And so that's where I see people get in their head so much that they're like, I know that I can do this, but because of the circumstances, I feel like I can do this, so this is what I'm going to put out. And it's kind of the vocal coach and the producer's job together in the studio is to bridge that gap and bring them back to where that is. And luckily these days, you know, with all the recording software available, you know, online and on computers, we're able to usually take that time and get things right. But it is really interesting.
Yeah, because, vocals are so interesting like that because there is the note you're singing, there are the words you're singing, but then there's the emotion. Like, I'm an English teacher. I teach high school English. And one of the things I love to talk to my students about, like say we're doing like Shakespeare, reading like a play, you know, Hamlet or something like that.
Right.
We have the words and that's it. We don't have like the recording of Shakespeare's version or the play that we can watch.
Right.
We just have words. And if you think about meaning in words, the actual words is a very small percentage of what the meaning of the communication actually is.
Yes.
Because, I mean, you could say to somebody like, don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Don't do that. And that sounds friendly, but you could be like, don't do that through your teeth, you know? Or you could say, don't do that. Don't do that. There's so many ways you can change the meaning of the same phrase, even just 3 words like that. And singing is now this is a big part of it, because like it's not just hitting the notes, because we've all heard like singers sing a song and it's, it sounds good, but then you hear like an artist sing it, someone that's artfully singing it and with the emotion, and they might even be doing it a little bit wrong even, or letting their voice break, and there's just so much communication that happens there. Do you teach that? Is that something like you explore with singers, or is this something that comes like later in the game, what you really need to have some sort of foundation first?
Well, it does come later in the game, and you do need to have some foundation, but I wish I could show you this. I'm going to send you a link to this later, but basically I've, kind of a tenet of my personal approach to teaching singing is that there's kind of like this pyramid, and there's different ways, and maybe if you enable sharing, I can actually show it to you.
Sure.
But basically, we think of singing as built up of lots of different kind of skill sets in the voice. And I think that you'll find this helpful. I'm just going to pull this up real quick. And you can attach this to the show notes or whatever, so that people can find this. But basically, this is the way that I envision it right here. Is I call this the perfect performance pyramid. Now, I always like to say there's no such thing as a perfect performance. It doesn't exist. However, you'll notice that as you start working on these different skill sets in your voice, you work on your rhythm, you work on your pitch, discover chest voice and head voice, you combine them together to create this mixed voice, you're moving up the pyramid towards more and more difficult things that you can, once you've got these kind of bottom fundamentals kind of shored up, then you can start to concentrate more on your interpretation, on your style, on, you know what, I want to change the way that I approach that note. Is it feasible for a beginning singer who's struggling with pitch to then worry about the way that they're phrasing words? Sometimes, but you probably have to, that's kind of where experience comes in as a voice teacher, is like you have to kind of figure out what they're ready for, what they can handle, and just inch them a little bit further as much as you can. So yes, you're right. It does tend to happen later in the game. Does that mean that if someone is, singing something with obviously the wrong approach, that you're not going to correct it? No, of course you'll correct it if you can. But again, it's like playing that game of trying to figure out how far you can push them, and at the same time, make sure that they don't go all to pieces because you've overloaded them with stuff. Right. I was thinking earlier when you were talking about like the tone, and I was thinking about like, what's that song? I'm so happy because today I found my friends. Can you remind me the name
Lithium.
Of that song?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I was like going to call it bipolar, but I know it's about bipolar, but lithium salts are used to address bipolar disorder, or used to be. Anyway, but I mean, that's what an interesting lyric to put behind this really minor chord progression. You listen to that and you're like, this guy's not happy. There's no way,
Yeah, and it's a good example too. Nirvana, I think, is a great example of like as playing in like, I love Nirvana. I learned guitar off of Nirvana, and but like you just can't. And then it's not like it's super hard to play on guitar. I would say like, it's still complicated and you got to do it right. But like, I just never really hear Nirvana get covered well. Yeah. Because it's so much his voice,
Right.
So much the sound of the guitar. It's so much how the drums, everything in that band is like about how, not what. And
Yes.
obviously what needs to be there. You can't play the wrong notes. But it's so much, I've heard bands play it like perfectly, and it sounds terrible. You know, it has none of the like attitude or ferocity.
Right.
And it's like almost like untouchable in a lot of ways because
the odds of getting another Kurt Cobain, Dave Grohl, and Chris Novoselic together in the same 3-piece group is pretty slim, right? Like a lot of drummers are not Dave Grohl drummers. A lot of guitarists and singers are not Kurt Cobain singers. So yeah, it was a magical combination, and you know get struck by lightning, and you know then it's gone. So what you need to find, I think, as a vocalist is your own unique sound within your own unique instrument. You know, I can do a pretty good Chris Cornell impression. I'm on a cobweb afternoon in a room full of emptiness. You know, you just narrow all your vowels and you add a little bit of that rasp to it, and you've got Chris Cornell. But I don't sound as good as Chris Cornell. I sound like a poor man's imitation of Chris Cornell. It would be so much better if I would just kind of sing that in my own voice, with my own approach, rather than trying to co-opt someone else's.
You know, that's actually the exact approach I take whenever I'm playing a song. You know, just trying to learn something is I know I'm not going to be able to do it like that particular artist or singer. So you just kind of mess it up in your own way and go with that.
Right.
And it tends to at least be like its own thing and not like like you said, a poor man's version of this. It has its own sort of character. Yeah.
I mean, let's not discount that like inspiration needs to happen. Like you need to be inspired by somebody in order to start playing music, in order to become a singer, whatever it happens to be. Like that's the first spark. That's the first thing that needs to be there. Where I see so many singers kind of go off the rails is that they base their entire sound off of one singer. Like for instance, like I had this really great student, really good singer. She was in this kind of like punk ska band, and Gwen Stefani, she was like a Gwen Stefani sound-alike, like perfect. Well, not to take anything away from Gwen, but Gwen is like this really kind of squeezy singer. Like she really squeezes a lot in her voice. And she doesn't really sing a whole lot above her first passage. By the way, if you don't know what the first passage is, typically most females' first passage is the changeover between the bottom part of your voice or the chest voice and the top part of your voice, your head voice. And that for most females tends to start around A flat 4, A4, B flat 4, B4, C5, and that area. That's where most females tend to change over. Now, that works really, really well for Gwen Stefani. But if you're basing your entire technique off of her, there are some crucial things that you're going to miss, like the ability to sing from the bottom to the top of your voice, for instance.
Yeah. She's another good example where you know it's her when you hear her.
The moment you hear it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe, I mean, I'd have to listen to more of her music. But I don't know if I'd put her on American Idol season finale.
But she judges. She
Yeah.
judges those shows, and she appears on those shows, and she's like what? It's kind of funny, actually. Now that we bring this up, it's kind of ironic that she has such a specific sound, and she's not like an overly trained singer. She's definitely had vocal training. Don't get me wrong, but she found kind of her style first. And then she, I think, someone double check me on this and send me an angry email if I'm wrong. But my guess is that she probably kind of found her approach, her production style first. And then as she was touring like crazy, she probably found a vocal coach to kind of help her manage that. And so it's funny because she is not what I would call like an overly trained voice. Like the moment that you hear it, you're like, oh, that's Gwen Stefani. Versus like all of these fantastically trained singers that sound alike. You know what I mean? That it's like, oh, it's not that they've trained out what makes them unique. It's that they've tried to sing like someone else for so long that they've kind of lost themselves a little bit in the process. Now, let me start off by saying that's a great problem to have. I mean, what we're talking, if you're singing like Demi Lovato and you sound just like her, and you can nail riffs and runs and go up to, you know, an E flat 5 or something like that in full chest voice like Demi does. I mean, again, I haven't checked that pitch, but just as an example, as a rhetorical example, if you can hit those notes like she can, that's a great problem to have. I mean, congratulations to you on being able to sing like that. But if we are looking at those kind of like really standouts, those big outliers, that it's like, oh, wow, that's a really unique voice, then yeah, I think some work needs to be done in kind of like nailing down what that is.
Yeah, I hope that comment I made didn't come across as like, disparaging towards Gwen Stefani, because really what I'm getting at are those are the kinds of singers I like the most, you know, the ones that have that style. And maybe that's what it is. They've sort of like found the attitude, the style, the approach, and then it's a matter of refining from there. But I think that's really like a lot of the artists that really like kind of stick around and make it and do cool things, they have that going for them as well.
Yeah. I mean, so this is kind of a funny example, or maybe it's not a funny example, but Dave Matthews, very unique sound. The minute he wakes up in the morning, like you hear it, in the moment you hear it, you're like, ah, there's old Dave. He is a vocal coach, but I don't think that he was coached so much at the beginning that it completely changed his sound into a trained singer. I think that he kind of found his sound as he was developing his voice, and now he uses, you know, coaching to kind of help him keep that. And I think that that's vocal coaching at its best. Is like if you're a well-performing singer and you decide to seek out some vocal coaching, you don't want somebody that's going to completely take away what's working. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater there. At its best, vocal coaching is just designed to help you get even further and closer to your goal of what that perfect performance is for you.
Yeah, that's a good example too. I mean, you know them when you hear them.
You do.
And I think that's a pretty cool thing for any musician, like to be known by the sound. I mean, if it was a guitarist, if it was a drummer, I mean, that's awesome. And that's a hard thing, I think, to teach someone. It's almost like a discovery you have to go through. You've got to really figure that out. Yeah.
I have a student that's just a phenomenal guitarist. And if you ask him to play any Stevie Ray Vaughan, any John Mayer, boom, he's got it. Just like it's in his fingers. And again, I don't want to talk out of school, but like trying to write your own music can be a little bit challenging sometimes when you've ingrained that other stuff into you so deeply. It's like trying to figure out where you fit in the cracks between like how much you've like ingrained this one artist's sound into you. It's like, where do you find your uniqueness there? And wouldn't it be better if you did some exploration and did some work to find out like what you truly enjoy playing and what you truly enjoy sounding like, rather than, oh, I really like X, so I'm going to do everything that sounds like X, you know?
Yeah, it's a good point. And that's like the magic thing, right? It's finding that sound.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This is something that keeps coming up is like, you know, everybody wants to sing like Adele or, you know, Bruno Mars or Sam Smith, John Legend, or what have you. But I think it's easy for us to forget that what we love about those singers is all of them have incredibly unique voices. Yeah. Very trained. Some of them are very trained. Not necessarily all of the ones that I mentioned, but some of them are very trained. And still, it's like the moment you hear it, you're like, oh, that's that guy or that's that gal.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the thing that differentiates them. You know, that's why, you know, season whatever winner of American Idol isn't an immediate pop star. You know, that was like supposed to be the deal, right? You were supposed to get this new pop star. We're going to show you how we do it, and here it is. Here she is.
Right.
And it didn't always translate.
Definitely not. Definitely doesn't always translate. There's so much more to artistry than just good technique.
Right.
And I know that may be kind of like shooting myself in the foot to say that, because I do think that technique is incredibly important for most of the singers or potential singers that are hearing this. Most of them probably do need to work on their voice. But if we're talking about those outliers, those like exceptionally talented folks that need to break out, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I don't think that's shooting yourself in the foot at all, because I think that's a really important thing to be aware of when you're training somebody, to like notice like, hey, this is something you're doing that's pretty neat. That's a strength of yours, instead of massaging it out through overtraining. I mean, that can happen in a lot of instances. Some of the people we've talked about, I'd hate to have had them like, taught not, Kurt, you can't growl like that when you sing those high notes. Like, we wouldn't be talking about him if that was the case.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like telling a race car driver not to go fast. Right. No, like a good vocal coach is like part of your pit crew, and that like they're trying to make, like, they know you're going to go fast, but they know that the whole goal is to go fast. They're just going to make sure that like your car is as safe as possible, so that when you are going, 200 miles an hour, I don't know if that's a realistic speed or not, but when you are going that fast, that you don't just, your car doesn't burst into flames.
Right. Good example. So I thought maybe I'd ask you a little bit about some of the like places, well, at least where I know I run into trouble. I bet a lot of people do. And just what some thoughts, some ways you might approach that. Like for one, I think maybe a good place to start is just like pitch. Guitar is cool because they have frets. Pianos are cool because they have keys. All that infinite space in between the two notes is not there. You don't have to worry about it. But singing,
you're telling me that I can't put a finger on my throat and all of a sudden it's a C4 or something like that?
No, I'm afraid not. At least maybe you can tell me. But there's like there's an infinite number of notes between any two notes. Right. So do you have any and I think I thought for a long time that you either just were tone deaf or you could sing the notes, Right. But I've
that's
learned,
what we're taught.
Thankfully, that's not the case. But I think that's always been a spot I've struggled with myself. I'm sure every singer would say that, right? But how do you approach that? Any advice for singers? 2-minute advice here.
2-minute advice?
I mean, okay. I know this is probably this is the entire course of study I'm asking you, but, any...
No, that's okay. I mean...
Exercise.
First of all, let's just state this is something that I don't think a lot of people know, is that no matter how good of a singer you are, like objectively, like ranked, like from the total most beginner to the most advanced singer, no matter where you are on that spectrum, you still want more control over your voice. You could be the most phenomenally talented singer out there, but I've met some phenomenally talented singers that still want to get better. And by the way, they usually don't think that they're phenomenally talented. Usually they can only hear what's wrong. So I just want to point that out, that, no matter what level you're at, everybody wants to sing more in tune. Everybody wants to hit higher notes with more power. These are, no matter where you're at, this is all true. Blanket statement about almost all musicians or all singers. Now, as far as pitch, here's the interesting thing about pitch. Yes, most of us were taught that it's binary, that either you sing on pitch or you don't. But as a vocal coach with, 10 years of experience now, I've learned how to ask myself, why? Why are they singing off pitch? There are some people, and I would say there's probably two generic reasons. There are some people that sing so lightly that their pitch is almost always going sharp. They're like, they go way up above the pitch. And I don't know if you can hear my piano in the background, but I ended up about a major third above the note that I was supposed to there. And for those singers, oftentimes it's more helpful to really get them grounded in their voice and really turn that from an into an into a fuller sound. Now, I'm not saying that you want to sing everything like a Broadway singer, but in training, it's really important to get that foundation first And then you can start adding effects like being more breathy, etc. Now, the second general thing, or the second general reason why most people will not sing on pitch is the opposite, is that rather than going too light, they're going too heavy. So if you give them that same scale, rather than they're and they just won't match the pitch because they've got so much tension and they've got so much kind of raw gut on all those notes that they're almost always going to be flat. Now, not saying always, sometimes they could be sharp too, but the pitch is going to be unstable. And so figuring out, and with those folks, by the way, you need to learn how to help them release that tension. So rather than, they're, and again, you don't necessarily want them to sound like a Broadway singer or anything like that, but it is helpful if they're all the way over here with tension, and this is where we want them, to go all the way over here for a second, so that they'll most likely find themselves right in the middle. And that is crucially important to figure out what kind of a singer you are in terms of pitch in that way, and start to fix that. And I actually have a course on this. It's called Sing on Pitch, and people can check it out if you want to leave the link. But basically, what's so interesting about pitch is we think of it as this like problem of perception. Like, I can't tell if I'm on pitch or off pitch, or we see it from the third person. We're like, wow, that person cannot tell what note they're singing. But again, think about why. Why are they off pitch? Is it because, they're not using their breath right? Is it because they haven't coordinated their voice? Or are they legitimately, do they have amusia or tone deafness? Which, by the way, only affects about like 3% of the total population. So if you're listening to this, there's like a 97% chance that you can learn to sing in tune. You just probably need to use the right exercises to coordinate your voice that way. Sorry, that was a little over 2 minutes, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think you mentioned like he doesn't even know what notes he's singing, and sometimes that's the problem, actually. Like you don't know what notes you're singing. And I've found like playing it on the guitar, going over it that way, like is definitely very helpful.
Wait, there's actual notes that I'm supposed to sing? I mean, it's kind of
I didn't know that when I first started playing guitar until I recorded myself singing the first time.
Right.
I was like, what is wrong with me? And
a lot of people don't understand that there's actual notes that you're supposed to sing. Like even with, some of the more aggressive singers that we mentioned, like Kurt Cobain, I mean, there's real notes there that he is singing, even though he's singing with a lot of grit and distortion or what have you, a lot of rasp. If you put it down on paper, there's actual legitimate notes there to sing. And so it's very rare that you find a singer that to break what those notes are down isn't helpful. I'll say that a different way. It's almost always helpful to break down what notes you're supposed to be singing are. It's not going to make you less of an artist. It's not going to make you a less artistic singer to actually figure out what notes you're supposed to sing. It's probably going to make you better.
Yeah, I remember vividly learning that for the first time. Like,
is that painful, Brian? Is that painful to bring that up?
Oh, yeah. Because I remember taking the guitar out, the tape recorder, and being like, all right, I'm going to do it. And I was like, I had no idea. But it was actually learning songs where the guitar solo was the vocal melody. And then that all clicked for me. I was like, oh, I see. And, it didn't mean I could do it, but it definitely like opened a whole door for understanding.
100%. And realizing that is kind of the first step. And then figuring out what I like about the way that you said that is like breaking it down into a step-by-step thing of like figuring out what notes you're supposed to sing is step one. Listening to yourself singing it and understanding where you're not matching up with those notes is step number 2. And step number 3, actually using some exercises to fix that is kind of the last part of that. But again, what you're kind of implying here is it wasn't until you listened back to it that you realized we're sometimes the worst judges of how we sound in the moment. We've all had that time where we're listening back to our voicemail and we're like, I don't sound like that. Yeah, you do. You really do. And so this dissonance in between what we think we sound like, or what we think we're singing, and what we're actually singing is sometimes very different.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I get that sometimes editing this podcast. Like, oh man, listen to me.
That's your job, dude. That's like part of your job is listening to yourself. And it's just, it's tough no matter how good you are. I mean, I think Adele is famous for saying that she doesn't like the sound of her own voice. And it's kind of like, if Adele doesn't like the sound of her voice, like, where's the hope for the rest of us?
Yeah, I remember hearing that about John Lennon too. And it's like, what? Like, come on. But
right.
Yeah. What about like stamina? When I'm playing live sets, I can usually get through my like 40 minutes or so. And then if we go to do it again, the second time is a much different story. And I know it has to do with probably like tension and things like that. But there's definitely like a point, where you got to warm up, you got to get ready, you get into the zone, but then it's like, it's a hill, it's a mountain shape where all of a sudden you're falling down real quick.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head in saying that it's tension, because if you're having a hard time singing over 40 minutes, there's probably something wrong. There's probably something, and by wrong, I don't mean like capital W-R-O-N-G. It's just, there's probably some ways. Did I misspell that? I hope I spelled that.
Oh no, I was just being ashamed.
Okay, good. I was like spelling on the fly in front of an English teacher. There's probably some optimizations that you could do to your singing. Like, are there songs that are maybe put in the wrong key or could be pitched better, where it would be more sustainable? Now, there's kind of an art to like putting your set list together in a way that your voice is gonna do well with. And it is possible, like if you absolutely refuse to do vocal warm-ups before you sing a set, you can kind of structure your set list in a way that's gonna kind of warm you up as you go. Are you gonna put your most difficult song right up front? No way. Because you've already basically said, you've added all this tension into your voice, and now it's teaching your voice that every song after that probably needs to have some of that tension too. Instead, it's better to kind of warm up into those notes kind of like in the middle, or if you can think of it as like 4 parts. Sorry, that's 3 parts. I can't. Let's see if I can do that in the camera for all of you guys that are watching. Your first part is just kind of warming you up, maybe a couple of high notes, but nothing crazy. Second part, you've got a few more high notes. Again, nothing super crazy. The third part is where you kind of put some of your harder stuff, because by that point, and this is like assuming like an hour-long set or something like that, that third part is where you can start to put some more challenging stuff. And then at the very end, you kind of put your highest energy stuff, but maybe not the most technically difficult. You'll notice that this is where like a lot of live singers will be like, okay, you guys sing it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not because they want the crowd to participate. It's because they've run out of gas and they need your help.
Yeah. I mean, well, some singers, watch like Bruce Springsteen do a 3.5 hour set, and you're like, I can't even talk for that long.
Especially for the way that he sings too. Yeah. Everything. I love the boss. Don't get me wrong, but and I don't want to talk ill of him at all. But he's an older guy now, and if you listen to his speaking voice, things are not working that well anymore. And I would almost guarantee that he's been working with someone to try to hold on to what he's still got, because that's like such a part of his brand, is that he's the guy that goes and plays for 3 hours, and he loves it. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that he absolutely loves it. And if he lost his voice, he would still keep singing, I bet. But it would be so much better if you're kind of like just getting started off on this journey, about thinking about, approach these songs like you're going to have to sing them for 30 years. Very, very few singers have that kind of foresight. And if they're like, oh, wow, if I get a chance to sing the song for 30 years, that's a beautiful thing. And most people would take that bet. But also, this is why you see that over time, people tend to lower the keys a little bit to make sure that they don't strain so much.
Yeah. Yeah, we've started tuning our guitars to E flat rather than E. That has made my life a lot easier.
You're just trying to be like Weezer, man.
Well, that's what all those bands in the 90s were doing, you know? So
yeah,
it's kind of fun, like when I want to play along to like those old songs. It's like,
yes.
oh, at least I'm in tune now.
But here's a question, and this is kind of a rhetorical question, is did they tune to E flat as like an effect or a stylistic choice, or did they tune to E flat to make it easier to sing? I would wager, and I don't know that this is true for sure, but I would guess that most of them, I'm thinking of like Green Day always tuned a half step down, Weezer always tuned a half step down, at least. I would guess that most of them just liked the way that the strings felt and the way that their guitars like had some more bottom end. And that's why they did it. And as a side benefit, it was also a little easier to sing. Because if we're talking about singing, I mean, the difference between singing an E flat and an E, a pretty small difference in some ways. You know, if you can sing up to an E flat, most likely you can sing up to an E. Not saying 100% of the time, because that is where most men start to transition from the bottom to the top part of their voice, what we call the first passage. But most likely they could do it. So I do think it's interesting, but you're right too, Brian, in that sometimes that little half step can make a difference in your voice.
Yeah, but the course of an hour.
yeah. Think it's kind of like you're saving notes. You're like, okay, I would have had to sing higher there. I would have had to sing higher there. And over the course of an hour, it adds up, and you've got like more notes in your vocal bank account.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because I've found myself wanting to string my guitars with a higher gauge, you know, just slightly thicker strings from maybe like the 9s to the 10s. Just has that feel. You know, some of my guitars actually feel really nice doing that, even nicer than they do in standard. It's interesting.
Yeah. I tuned this Takamine behind me. I tuned that Takamine down a whole step, everything across the board. And it's just gorgeous. Like just the sound of it, like that darkness that you get in there. And your playability changes a lot too. And one thing just to kind of bring it back to singing is sometimes as a vocal coach, I'll also ask people to raise the key. I actually ask them to do that quite often. There's a video on my YouTube channel. If you just go to Ramsey Voice Studio on YouTube, it's the first video that pops up like on the channel player of this young lady named Jenna that I was teaching.
You had to move the capo, right?
Yeah, exactly. And she was playing with the capo, but she was playing like a song that was lower. It was too low for her voice. And I actually told her to take off the capo and play different chord shapes so that the key was raised. And if you're having trouble following that at home, I know there's probably a lot of beginner guitarists that are listening to this or non-guitarists. Basically, we took it from a lower key up to a higher key, and all of a sudden her voice just came alive. It just really opened up beautifully. And that's what you want as a singer, is lower is not necessarily better. Like, I love Leonard Cohen. I can't sing Leonard Cohen songs. I love Tom Waits. I cannot sing Tom Waits songs.
Right.
You know? And so finding about kind of like where your voice really should live and what kind of a voice you have and what it's good at is, again, a part of this exploration process.
Which I guess brings us full circle to your rangefinder app, right?
Do you see how I did that?
Worked out beautifully. But that has been a thing for me, like that's helped a lot, is like having a better understanding of, you know, what the range is, what notes come out good, where I'm stressing myself and where I'm losing it because it's too low. And that I think came to me really like by learning like which singers, you know, that I just felt more comfortable singing their songs. And
right.
Then you kind of realize like, oh, well, it's because I don't have to go all the way up there or all the way down here for this one.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what's an example of a singer that you're like, they're a good match for me?
I like Lou Reed, James Taylor sometimes. Not that I necessarily sing like them, but you know, like their area feels good.
Right.
John Lennon, not Paul McCartney so much. He's a bit higher, you know.
When you told me.
Yeah. It's just like, ooh.
Yeah. I mean, he hits a higher note in that the song that I was just Oh Darling. He hits I think it's an A flat 5. He sings or maybe it's an A5. He sings a higher note than I have in my entire range. Like I can go up there with an exercise maybe, but actually singing, I mean, that takes a lot of work.
He spoke a lot about that actual performance on, recording it, and he would show up at the studio like day after day, and sometimes like first thing in the morning where he was fresh, and he's like, no, it's not going to happen today.
Right.
So it's nice to hear, like, even for him, like, he had to work for it.
You're like, Paul had trouble with this note. What's cool about those singers that you mentioned, like, so James Taylor and Lou Reed, like, you can't think of two singers who are much more different.
Right.
What a difference in the way that they sing, but they both sing in a range that's comfortable, generally speaking, for you. And so finding kind of not even singers that are good sound-alikes for you, but also that write in ranges that tend to be comfortable for you is a great way to kind of get started. And that kind of brings it back to, like, most people start off with imitation. They start off by being inspired by other great singers, and then take that knowledge and try to put it into your own voice, into your own way. Like if you're just singing like James Taylor, there's already a James Taylor out there. If you're trying to just sing like Lou Reed, there's already there was, but thank God he lives on through music, that there's still a Lou Reed out there. So kind of finding your own place, your own ability to sing those songs is so crucial.
Yeah, I think we can also find a sound too by the collection of influences we throw together,
Yes.
Like that.
Pastiche.
Yeah, you kind of like make your own stew, and then you kind of mess up the recipe in your own style. I've grown more comfortable with that, I think, as I've gotten older. Like just, it doesn't sound like maybe some of the people I want it to sound like, but it's like, it's broken in my way, And,
yes.
And that's, I mean, that's what you got. You gotta come to terms with it on some level. Of course, you can work on it, but there's like a lot of, I guess with singing, it probably more so than like any other instrument, there's like a lot of like acceptance is really important, and like confidence is so important.
Yes.
And those are like, I guess, like why if you're working with a singer, say you're recording them, getting them feeling okay and comfortable is so important. Right.
Yeah. And that journey of acceptance, it doesn't happen after one voice lesson either. It doesn't happen after just one show. It doesn't happen after just one practice. This is a continual thing that evolves over time. I mean, I was really vulnerable earlier, and I try to be vulnerable with my students and tell them, like, hey, I don't think that I have like this $1 million voice. But knowing and having the confidence and being able to work it in any way that you need to, that is so, so crucial. And kind of just coming to accept that, oh, this is what I sound like. This is my voice. I'm not trying to change it. I'm trying to improve it, but I'm not trying to make it into something completely different either.
Nice. I think that's a good thing to preserve for your students, to not just, we spoke about it, but not train the style out of it, but also not have that be the only thing you're leaning on, to have that technical background to stand on.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes, man. It's been a lot of fun talking to you about this stuff, to get to pick your brain and learn some things. And I think we should definitely direct people to ramseyvoice.com, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if people want to try that vocal rangefinder, that's really easy to find as well. It's just rangefinder, all one word, .ramseyvoice.com. And Brian, you'll probably put that in the notes as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. So it's so easy. I mean, you just press the button, record one note, and then press record the next. So definitely worth checking out. for fun, if nothing
Yeah,
else.
absolutely. Learn more about your range so you can kind of figure out like what kind of voice type you are, your sound alikes, all of that stuff that we've talked about. That's kind of the first step.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you got a lot of great stuff on YouTube, and the blog is nice. So there's a lot of good information out there, and I'm enjoying what you're doing, and glad you're sharing your knowledge and giving the power to the people out there.
It's my pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely good. And please check out his stuff. As we said, ramseyvoice.com and rangefinder.ramseyvoice.com. And sing like, what is is it dance like no one's looking? You can sing like no one's listening. I don't know.
We can put it, sing like no one can hear you, I think is what you're looking for. But we can just mix up as many phrases as we want. Sing like the wind.
Right. Well, cool, man. It's been great talking to you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you've liked what you've heard, please stop by your local podcast provider and leave us a nice review. And if you want to support the podcast, you can do so with our Patreon at patreon.com/Brian Funk. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.